Hello, welcome to Mondays at the Museum. Today is President's Day and we have a special treat for you. I'm Harriet Weber from the Quincy Valley Historical Society and Museum, and I want to tell you about the man who's going to be speaking this evening. His name is Pat Haley. He is our current city administrator, and I found out some months ago that he has a fascinating hobby, and it's very much related to President's Day and all things presidential, as well as he's branched out in his hobby, and he's going to tell you all about that tonight. So I hope you will enjoy this. This is Season 2, Episode 2, President's Day 2021, Mr. Pat Haley speaking on his collection of presidential memorabilia.
Hi, I'm Pat Haley, Administrator for the City of Quincy, and it's my honor to describe a hobby that I started a number of years ago, quite accidentally, on collecting letters from the presidents of the United States while they're in the White House during my lifetime. And so I'm here to tell you the story of how that all got started and where we're at right now, and things that came as a byproduct of that led me to some other hobbies of collecting signatures of famous and historical people. So let's begin. Back in 1983, the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, had sent the 82nd Airborne to rescue American students who were being held hostage in Grenada. There was a big coup attempt at the time, and of course the president didn't want to see repeated a historical event of another hostage taking that he had just come out of in Iran during the Carter administration, and so he was going to put a stop to this very quickly. Well, my brother was in the 82nd Airborne, and we were just stunned at the event because there was nothing building up to it. Not like you see right now where world events get worse and worse and worse, and finally, we decide to do something. We're watching television, and all of a sudden a newscaster comes on saying, "We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this special announcement. Ronald Reagan has ordered the 82nd Airborne to rescue American hostages being held in a coup attempt in Grenada." We're all going like, "Oh my goodness, that's my brother, my family." Well, he turned out okay, and even though a number of soldiers did die in that event, so it was not without some casualties on our part. But you might remember the American hostages landing wherever they were, I'm presuming Florida, and kissing the tarmac, that they were so glad to be free and back in America. So I wrote a letter to the President of the United States because, it was close to home, and our family and the country was kind of responding to it. And I thought, he needs to be encouraged. And so I just thanked him for his courage to make that decision and for doing what was right rather than necessarily what was popular. And I just, in general, just thanked him for his service to our country and all the sacrifices that him and his family make. And of course, this was at a time when quite controversial in the early part of his administration, where they were challenging him on a number of things. And I just wanted to say thank you for all the sacrifices you make for our country and the good that you're trying to do. Well, this was written in October of 1983, and a couple months later, I get a package or an envelope, a large manila envelope, with cardboard on the inside with a letter from the White House. And it's a letter from the President of the United States, and he is thanking me for my comments and asking me to remember soldiers who are protecting liberty and freedom for people all over the country and all over the world. And I was just like, oh my goodness, I got a letter from the White House. How priceless is this? And it's embossed, and my name is on the bottom here, and it's directed to me personally. And I was just, thrilled at the opportunity. And then I got to thinking, well, there's other presidents that are still alive, and Jimmy Carter, Gerald Ford, and Richard Nixon were still alive at that time, and I thought, I wonder if I can get a letter from them. So I wrote each of them at the same time, much more briefer, but saying thank you for your service to our country, and thank you for all the sacrifices you and your family made in that service, and for all the things that you did that nobody will ever know about, because I'm sure there's a lot goes unseen. Well, I got a letter back from Jimmy Carter, and it's just a couple sentences long, and it's on his letterhead, so it's not on White House letterhead, but it's on his letterhead. And incidentally, when a past president has some kind of correspondence, they don't need a stamp. They just put their name where the stamp goes. And I got a letter from from Gerald Ford, and it's the same thing. Gerald Ford's name is where the stamp goes. And I later learned that this is a tradition that goes back to Washington because past presidents are involved in a lot of correspondence. And so instead of just having to pay for all the postage, that's all they need to do is put their name where the stamp goes. So I got a letter from Richard Nixon, quite brief. This letter, however, is not the actual letter. These are all the first three were the actual letters. This is not an actual letter. It was on full-size letterhead, and so I've shrunk it down. And so I got these letters from the president. This is back in 1989, and of course Ronald Reagan didn't run for second term or third term, and George H. Bush took over. And so this is his letter from the White House. So I'm starting this tradition of collecting a letter from every president in the White House during my lifetime. So I have all these letters to pass on. And so right now, I'm only missing Johnson, Kennedy, Eisenhower, and did I leave somebody out? And Truman. Okay. So I have these letters now, beginning with Clinton. He went back to a full-size letterhead. The same for George W. Bush, President Obama, and President Trump. And I guess I'll be getting a 10th letter from our current president. And what I do is just basically wait for an event that I can very authentically thank them for, and just say, I appreciate the courage that you made in this decision, and I want you to know that I support you in this particular area. And thank you for all the service that you do for our country and the sacrifices for your family. And once again, thank you for all the things that nobody ever knows about. And so these letters I've gotten back, and I will, as I said, add it. Well, now I'd like to describe something that happened as a result of these letters being sent that was completely a surprise and unexpected. As I said, these past presidents wrote back on their letterhead, and I would guess that Richard Nixon didn't get a lot of letters thanking him for his presidency because he wasn't very popular. And so with his letter, it came in a big manila envelope, a package, padded envelope. And in that envelope was a picture of the Nixon family taken during his some kind of birthday gathering. It's his grandkids. That's a big deal in anybody's life, as I said in the letter. But he also included a book that he wrote called No More Vietnams. And this book tells the story of him serving as vice president under Eisenhower when we first got involved in Vietnam, and what he did to end the Vietnam War and get out of Vietnam. And so he autographed this book and included his business card. I thought, oh my goodness, I have a business card and an autographed book of the former president of the United States. This is amazing, you know. We got letters and now books. And then it occurred to me, well, maybe these presidents have written memoirs, you know, I could kind of just keep this going. And so after Ronald Reagan was out of office, sure enough, he wrote a memoir called The American Life. And it's his story of his presidency and his life. And he autographed the book. I'll show you that. There it is, Ronald Reagan. And the date that he signed it, because I always ask him to sign the book so that I can show some authenticity to it. I went to do a value book search, and since, of course, he's passed away, this book is worth $4,000. I thought, oh my goodness, let's get this insured. And then I thought, well, let's just keep her going. So I have the memoirs of Jimmy Carter and the memoirs of Gerald Ford. And as I said, I have Nixon's book. Now we're dealing with presidents who've passed away. And so in Johnson's book, in his White House years, I got his wife, Lady Bird Johnson, to sign it. And then, of course, Kennedy was killed in office, and I don't recall what Jacqueline Kennedy was doing at the time. But I thought, well, why not get his family member to sign the book? And so Carolyn Kennedy signed the book. And this is the first time I've asked them to put my name in there, so now it becomes more personalized. And she signed the book and said, I'm so glad to share my father's vision for our country. It means so much to me, Carrie Kennedy. I found out that she doesn't like to be, well, her friends call her Carrie instead of Carolyn. And then I just kept going back into history, and I got Truman and Roosevelt and Hoover, and I just kept going back and back. And it got a little harder because now we're dealing with ancestors who may or may not have family members that carry the name. They may have daughters and the name's lost. This is probably one of the oldest books that I have, and this is John Quincy Adams, and it is signed by Benjamin Adams, who shows himself as being the great-great-great-grandson of John Quincy Adams. And it's a period biography. That's the trick, is that if you get contemporary biographies, they're usually not as flattering to the family. So if you are asking a family member to sign something on their ancestor and the book isn't very flattering, they might just say no. But period biographies are usually very flattering because the family's still alive. So this is John Quincy Adams, and David McCullough wrote a book. David McCullough wrote a book on John Adams, which was very popular. There was a mini-series done on this book as well. And the trick is to find the ancestor, because you can't write John Adams and get them. And this book received an award, and in that award, the lady who was representing the family wrote a speech, and she says, "In the backwaters of Maine, where I live." Now, it did give me her name, Abigail Adams Manning. So I did a search in the backwaters of Maine, and I found a town that lists themselves as backwaters of Maine. And since I had her name, I did a phone search and found her address, and she signed it. And she wrote this nice letter thanking me for my comments. And she signed it Abigail Adams, who is John Adams' wife's name, Abigail. And she is listed as the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of John Adams. I thought, oh my goodness, how close can I get to the family? Well, the further you go back in history, the fewer memoirs that are actually done, because the first president to actually write his memoirs of his presidency was Ulysses S. Grant. And Mark Twain actually inspired him to do that, because they didn't have a pension for presidents at the time. And he had lost all his money in a bad investment deal. And so he was broke and he had nothing for his family. Mark Twain edited the memoirs of Grant, and he completed it about a week before he died. So that became a bestseller. Incidentally, I have that book autographed. George Washington didn't have any biographies written, or autobiographies, but there were plenty of biographies, and the first one to come out was written by Parson Weems, called The Life of Washington. And this is the story where we get the story of George Washington chopping down the cherry tree when he was a young boy, and his father commended him for his honesty. And so this has been kind of dismissed by scholars, because the story comes from a relative or a neighbor who lived 50 years ago, and they didn't think it was very credible. Well, this book was one of Abraham Lincoln's favorite books. It was written 50 years after Washington, and Lincoln had it in his possession and referred to it many times. So I thought, well, if it's good enough for Lincoln, it's good enough for me. And I found the last male living descendant of George Washington, who lists himself as Paul Washington. So I have something all the way back to the President of the United States. So currently my goal is to get something on every president and signed by a family member. And right now I am on President, our 14th president, after McKinley, let's see, where am I at? I am on Franklin Pierce, our 14th president. So I have about 12 more to go. And I'm currently reading the book on Madison, memoirs on Madison, and the memoirs of James Monroe. So that'll fill in the gaps. Thomas Jefferson's going to be a little tricky, because now you're starting to find out, okay, his descendants are all gone, there's nobody alive, but there are slaves who claim that they're a descendant of a relationship that he had with his slaves. So that may be a possibility. But in addition to presidents, I thought, well, why stop with them? Let's just keep on going, because there's a lot of historical figures that have had big impacts. And so I started collecting books on military leaders. And this is George Marshall. George Marshall was the commander-in-chief above Eisenhower, but he wasn't in the theater. He was in the Roosevelt administration. And this is his grandson who signed this book. His name is James Marshall, and he's autographed his father's book. Incidentally, Marshall did not publish his memoirs because he said he knew too much and he didn't want to write it down. So he didn't want to disgrace anybody that he was connected to, which would have been Roosevelt and Truman. As I said, military leaders really enjoy being remembered for their events, and this is a World War II person who participated in the war of the Battle of Okinawa, which was a horrible battle. It preceded the dropping of our atomic bombs into Japan. They realized from this battle, well, if this is what the Japanese do on Okinawa, what are we going to do when we hit the mainland? And so that made the decision to actually drop the atomic bomb. And he not only wrote me a nice letter, he was 93 at the time, I'm sure he's passed away, but he also included this picture of him holding up a Japanese flag there on the island of Okinawa. And I thought, oh my goodness, this kid's about 19 there. And here he is, a piece of history that he shared with me on his service in Okinawa. Well, I thought, okay, let's just keep on going. And I've got General Patton and I've got Omar Bradley, other historical figures of World War II. Hey, how about World War I? So John Pershing wrote a 2-volume memoir on his service in World War I, and I managed to track down his great-granddaughter, who signed this book to Patrick Haley, March 3rd, 2009, with all good wishes, Sandra Sinclair Pershing. She is the great-granddaughter of John Pershing, and it's a 2-volume set, so I hated to have only one book written. I thought, well, maybe I can find a World War I veteran. And sure enough, there was a guy alive who signed this book, World War I veteran. He was near 100 at the time. He died at 110 years old. And so he was the last living relative, or last living veteran from World War I. And there's a picture of him in the service and a picture of him as an older man. And so he signed Pershing's second volume. The Battle of Gettysburg was really saved by this man, Joshua Chamberlain. He was a professor and a colonel major in this particular battle, and many believe that he saved the Gettysburg conflict because he held the line at Little Round Top. And so this is his fourth cousin removed, Dale Chamberlain, signed his ancestor's book, Joshua Chamberlain. Well, this has been expanded to include world leaders, historical events, anything to try that had an impact on the world. So Margaret Thatcher, Ariel Sharon, Pope John Paul II, anybody who had any kind of history mark. I either got a memoir or some period biography and got that person or family member to sign it. One of the books that I wanted to get autographed was First Landing on the Moon. And this is a book written by Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin. Well, I sent it to all three of them. Neil Armstrong sent the book back, says, I don't autograph books anymore as thank yous. I'm sorry, I just don't do that anymore. Michael Collins did sign it. And so I have his signature. He was the guy who flew the spacecraft that orbited the moon while these guys were working on it. And Buzz Aldrin sent the book back saying, I only autographed for $250. I thought, oh gosh, that's well beyond my budget. After all, I've got all these guys to sign for free. Why should I start paying for autographs? And then I came up with the idea. The Wenatchee World put out a book called Upside Down Pangborn, and it's a biography on Clyde Pangborn, who was a wing walker and did all sorts of acrobatic things during that time area. He was also a part of the flight team. Hugh Herndon and Clyde Pangborn were the first trans-Pacific flight from Misawa, Japan to Wenatchee, Washington. And that was a big deal, and they were reenacting the Miss Vidal. They were rebuilding that plane, and a team of pilots were meeting on a regular basis, and this book was published so that they could raise money to help fund the building of that plane. Well, then I got 2 copies of the book, and I had each of the team members sign the book. So there's about a dozen people who signed it, and I thought, okay, I sent this book along with this book, to Buzz Aldrin and said, you know, we had something historically happen in Wenatchee, and we had the first trans-Pacific flight, and it landed in Wenatchee, and it wasn't repeated till 10 years later in a twin-engine plane, so it's kind of historically significant, and you might take an interest in that. Would you care to take my copy of the book in exchange for your signature? Sure enough, the book came back, Buzz Aldrin, saved me $250. So I have those two signatures. Incidentally, I have Neil Armstrong's biography signed by his son. Benjamin Franklin wrote a biography, an autobiography, and I got Mike Castle from a Delaware congressman. He is the 5th great-grandson of Benjamin Franklin. And then I told you other historical figures that I went after. Winston Churchill wrote a biography on the United States called The Great Republic. And so his great-grandson, signed the book, who I had to track down in England, and his name is Winston Churchill III, not surprising. Many family members continue the historical figure. So in closing, I want to talk about how you do this, because that's part of the fun. When I find a book, I read it and I take notes. And in my letter, I will refer to sections in that book that I thought were inspiring or very meaningful. And I reference that, saying, this is how this book touched my life or influenced me. And then I put this book in a padded envelope, and I put postage on that, along with my letter. And then I put that in a larger envelope that has their address on it. And finding the address is the other half of the fun, because it's the hunt. And when you're looking for a family member who is related, it gets a little tricky. And if it wasn't for the internet, I would have a harder time. For example, I told you the story about Abigail Adams Manning. She just had a letter or a speech that she gave to say that she lived in the backwaters of Maine. And that's how I began my search. So the fun part is tracking down the family member and where they live, putting that address on the outside envelope. So when they receive it, when the person receives it, they open up the envelope, they open up the pad, or they see the padded envelope, they pull the book out, they read my letter, they sign it, put it back in the padded envelope, it's already got postage on, and then I get myself a present in the mail. And it's the closest that I'll ever get to actually meeting them, because I spent the time reading about their thoughts and then thanking their family member or the individual for their service or their sacrifices or all the good that they did. And it's just been a thrill to participate in this. Occasionally, because the people are so grateful to be remembered, particularly if they've passed away in history. For example, William Wilberforce was largely responsible for the freeing of slaves before it ever began, before the Civil War, before anything ever happened. William Wilberforce spent 50 years trying to convince England to end slavery. His first step was to end the slave trade, and his next step was actually to ban slavery in England. And he spent his entire life, 50 years of service in the Parliament, to finally convince, and of course there's always a monetary factor associated with that, convinced that this is a travesty. And he was first impacted by seeing a slave ship and the impact on the people that were participating in that. And I have William Wilberforce's great-grandson autograph the book, which not only inspired me, but a way of saying thank you. The whole world should say thank you to this guy, and he's kind of largely forgotten. He was memorialized in the movie Amazing Grace. There's a story about him. But as I said, the family members love to be remembered. And so in addition to John Marshall's signature, I got this service coin on John Marshall. And then I got this service coin from George Padden that they sent. It has his picture on the front. I also want to say that when you correspond with these people, they're often very grateful for having somebody remember their event or the influence of their ancestor. And in addition to the book or whatever I'm asking them to send back, the book in this case, I'll also get either a card or a letter or some kind of correspondence. And sometimes I get memorabilia. And for example, Frederick Douglass, his ancestor is Frederick Douglass IV. And he is actually an actor who goes around and does stage presentations of his great-grandfather as Frederick Douglass IV. He also makes barbecue sauce, and he sent me a jar of Frederick Douglass barbecue sauce. I thought, oh, how cute is this? And in addition, I've gotten service coins. And this is a service coin for George Marshall. Can you imagine what that would be worth to a serviceman? And it shows his image on the front of it, and it's with the Marshall Foundation. George Padden also sent me a service coin with his image on it. So I have a service coin of George Padden. And then the most rarest thing, or the most unique thing that I ever got back, when I got back the book from Joshua Chamberlain, because I was talking about the events for our country and how important it was what his ancestors did, he actually sent me, this is a musket ball. Now, it's not necessarily from the Battle of Gettysburg, but it was found in a battlefield in Groton, Massachusetts. So some battle took place there, and you know, these things probably are embedded in trees and ground and all over the place. And so I have a musket ball, not a ball anymore, so we don't know what this did when it was after it was fired. So that's the story. I have about 150 books that I have autographed. I started this hobby in 1984, and I've just continued ever since. I have presidents of the United States. So that's the story of how I started this collection and where it expanded to. And it all started with a letter to the President of the United States just thanking him for his service to our country and the sacrifices he made. From that, I got other letters from past presidents, and then I got a book. And Richard Nixon started this whole book collection that I have. And not many people are going to say, thank you, Richard Nixon, but I'm very grateful he sent me this book because it inspired me to collect all these other stories about people's lives and introduce me to a whole world of stories and recollections and history in a way that usually isn't presented in the history books, because it's from their experience directly, and it gives you many of the little backstories that you never read about. So I just want to encourage people to study history, because there's so many things to learn, and if you want, connect with them, because it's the closest I've ever gotten to actually meeting the person by thanking their ancestors for their writings and for connecting with their family to thank them for their service, whatever they did for humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. What an interesting collection that he has made over the last almost 40 years. Really appreciate him sharing that with us. And I hope you learned something tonight. I know I was a little inspired to start up a collection of my own. Some of you may have a collection or a hobby or something that you think is interesting that you would like to share with others. Or you might have an idea for us to go out and film someone in particular or on a particular topic. We'd love to hear from you. Please email us. You can go on our website, which is QVHSM, standing for Quincy Valley Historical Society Museum, qvhsm.org, and you can email us right on that website. So let us know your thoughts, give us feedback on this one, and we do have some upcoming ones already in the works. The first Monday in March will be an evening of more classical and Broadway tunes. We have Miss Allison Pheasant, who will be giving us her vocal stylings with some Broadway and some classical music, as well as a beautiful cello and violin duet with Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah Song. Then in mid-March, we have a Irish Ceilidh with David Lanigan and a bandmate from the Tri-Cities. He plays the pipes, so you'll be able to be really tuned in to all things Irish the week of St. Patrick's Day. And then we have some more in the works coming up, some field studies, some things on geology, and all kinds of interesting things. Isn't the world an interesting place? We just really appreciate it, appreciate your support. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you. Good night.